Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the stars shift as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The year was 2387, and humanity had been exploring space for over 200 years, but they had never seen anything like this. Dr. Lisa Grant pressed her face against the observation window and gasped at what lay before them. The Kepler 442 system was supposed to be empty according to all their surveys, but now massive ships filled the space around the fourth planet. These vessels were unlike anything in human databases, with smooth black surfaces that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved in perfect formation like a school of fish swimming through an ocean of stars. Ryan Burke, the tactical officer, ran his scans and shook his head. The readings made no sense because the ships seemed to be pulling energy directly from the planet below. Sam Parker, the chief engineer, studied the energy signatures and his face went pale. Whatever these aliens were doing, they were draining the planet dry. Jake opened a communication channel to the lead alien vessel. Static filled the speakers for several moments before a cold, mechanical voice responded. The voice had no emotion, no warmth, just the sound of clicking metal and electronic noise. "We are the Vex Collective," the voice said. "You have entered our harvest zone. Identify your species and prepare for evaluation." Jake took a deep breath and replied, "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Horizon representing humanity. We received distress signals from this system and came to investigate. What is happening to the planet below?" "The planet is being processed," the Vex voice answered without hesitation. "The indigenous population has served its purpose. Their biological energy feeds our expansion. You will submit to evaluation or be eliminated." Lisa stepped forward and whispered to Jake, "Captain, I am detecting millions of life signs on that planet. They are not all dead yet. We might be able to help them." Jake felt his jaw tighten as he watched the alien ships continue their work. Beams of red energy connected the vessels to the planet's surface, and with each passing moment, the world below grew dimmer. The distress signals they had followed were real, and millions of beings were dying while the Vex watched without care. "We cannot allow this genocide to continue," Jake said into the communication system. "Withdraw your ships immediately and allow us to provide aid to the survivors." The response came quickly and without emotion. "Your species designation is unknown to us. You appear to be carbon-based organic entities. Such forms are inefficient and require correction. Submit to our collective consciousness or face termination." Ryan Burke checked his weapon systems and found them completely outmatched. The Vex fleet consisted of over 100 ships each, larger than anything humanity had ever built. The Horizon was an exploration vessel, not a warship, and carried only basic defensive systems. Jake looked at his crew and saw determination in their eyes despite the impossible odds. Lisa was still studying the planet below, trying to find a way to save the dying population. Sam worked frantically at his station, attempting to understand the alien technology. Ryan prepared what few weapons they had, knowing they would likely be useless. The Vex voice spoke again, cutting through the silence on the bridge. "We have scanned your vessel and downloaded your navigation data. Your homeworld Earth has been located and marked for processing. The human species will be evaluated for incorporation into the collective. Resistance is futile." Something cold settled in Jake's stomach as he realized what this meant. By coming here to help, they had doomed their own world. The Vex now knew where Earth was, and humanity faced the same fate as the dying planet below. "No," Jake said firmly. "Humanity will never surrender to you. We protect those who cannot protect themselves, and we fight for what is right even when we cannot win." The alien ships began to move, changing their formation to surround the horizon. Energy weapons powered up with an ominous humming sound that echoed through space. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm and pointed at her scanner readings. "Captain," she said urgently, "the planet below is fighting back somehow. The life signs are not decreasing as fast as they should be. The people down there are still resisting." Jake smiled grimly and felt hope return to his heart. If the beings below could still fight, then perhaps this battle was not over. He turned to Ryan and gave the order that would change everything. All power to engines, he commanded. Take us into the atmosphere. If the Vex want to harvest this world, they will have to go through us first. The horizon dove toward the planet's surface as Vex ships gave chase. Energy beams filled the space around them, turning the darkness into a light show of destruction. Sam rerouted power from life support to the shields, while Lisa worked to establish contact with the survivors below. As they broke through the atmosphere, Jake saw cities burning and strange creatures fleeing from Vex harvesting machines. The planet was beautiful even in its death throes, with purple seas and golden forests that stretched to the horizon. The beings below looked similar to humans, but with longer limbs and skin that shimmered like starlight. These people were fighting with primitive weapons against advanced technology and losing badly, but they had not given up. Jake watched as groups of survivors attacked the harvesting machines with nothing but determination and courage. They reminded him of humanity during its darkest hours. The Vex ships followed the horizon into the atmosphere and began firing at both the human vessel and the survivors below. Jake realized they had stumbled into something much larger than a simple rescue mission. The Vex were not just harvesting this one world, they were expanding across the galaxy, consuming every species they encountered. Ryan managed to destroy one of the smaller Vex vessels with a lucky shot, but 10 more took its place. The enemy seemed endless, and their technology was far superior to anything humanity possessed. Sam reported that their shields were failing and life support was running low. Captain Lisa called out, "I am receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. The survivors are trying to tell us something." "Put it through," Jake ordered while dodging another energy beam that barely missed their hull. The transmission was weak and filled with static, but the message was clear. "Thank you for trying to help us," the alien voice said in broken English, somehow translated by their computers. "We are the Zephyrians, and we have been fighting the Vex for many cycles. Tell your people to prepare. The collective never stops. They will come for your world next." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he realized the full scope of what they faced. The Vex were not just attacking one world, they were consuming the entire galaxy, one species at a time. Humanity had just declared war on an enemy that had never been defeated, as the horizon limped away from the dying planet with Vex ships in pursuit. Jake made a decision that would echo across the stars. He activated the emergency beacon that would bring every human ship in the sector to their location. If the Vex wanted a fight, they would get one, but humanity would not face this threat alone. The last thing Jake saw as they jumped to faster-than-light speed was the planet below, finally going dark as the Vex completed their harvest. Millions of beings had died, but their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Humanity now knew what was coming, and they would be ready. Elena Rodriguez stood before the massive assembly hall that housed the Galactic Council, feeling very small and very alone. She was the first human to ever set foot in this ancient place, where civilizations older than Earth itself gathered to discuss matters of universal importance. The hall was carved from a single piece of crystal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Representatives from dozens of species filled the circular chamber, each more alien than the last. The ethereal order occupied the highest tier, their translucent forms floating in meditation pods that hummed with psychic energy. Below them sat the Corvin Empire, massive reptilian beings covered in natural armor that could stop laser fire. Hundreds of other species filled the remaining seats, creating a tapestry of life that humanity had never imagined possible. The Council chambers had stood for over 50,000 years, serving as neutral ground where conflicts could be resolved through words rather than weapons. Ancient laws governed every aspect of the proceedings, and Elena had spent weeks learning the protocols that would allow her to speak. One mistake could result in humanity being banned from ever requesting aid again. High Counselor Zeth of the Ethereal Order raised one graceful hand, and the chamber fell silent. His voice echoed in Elena's mind through telepathic translation that felt like cool water flowing through her thoughts. The session had begun, and there would be no second chances. The human representative will present her case, he announced to the assembly. Speak truthfully and completely, for the ancient censors of this hall detect deception in any form. Alina activated the holographic display that Jake Morrison and his crew had prepared during their escape from the Vex. Images of the dying planet filled the chamber, showing the systematic harvesting of an entire world. Gasps and cries of dismay rose from species that had thought themselves safe from such horrors. The Vex Collective has returned. Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. They have destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld and downloaded the coordinates to Earth. My people request military assistance to defend our system from this threat. A heavy silence fell over the chamber as representatives exchanged worried glances through dozens of different sensory organs. Elena noticed that many of the older species seemed genuinely afraid, and she began to understand that humanity had stumbled into something far worse than they realized. Commander Thek of the Corvan Empire stood slowly, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. The Corvans were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors who had conquered half the known systems through military might. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of bitter experience. The Vex cannot be stopped, he rumbled, causing the crystal walls to vibrate with each word. We lost our homeworld to them 800 years ago. Our greatest fleets were consumed and added to their collective. No species has ever successfully defended against a full Vex incursion. High Counselor Zeth nodded sadly, his ethereal features, showing ancient pain. The Ethereal Order was once the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, he explained to Elena. Our technology surpassed all others, and our psychic abilities allowed us to manipulate matter and energy with thought alone. Yet when the Vex came, we barely escaped with a fraction of our people. Elena felt her heart sink as she realized the scope of what humanity faced. If civilizations this advanced could not stop the Vex, what hope did humans have with their primitive technology and small fleet? But she had not come this far to give up without a fight. There must be something we can do, she insisted, looking around the chamber. Some weakness in their design or tactic that has not been exploited. Humanity will not surrender without a battle. New voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber, and Elena turned to see a figure she had not noticed before. The being was ancient beyond measure, with cybernetic implants covering most of its organic parts. When it moved, servo motors whined and hydraulic systems hissed. I am Archive Unit 774 of the Nexus Builders, the figure announced in a voice like grinding metal. We have observed Vex expansion for 3 millennia. Their tactics are uniform across all encounters. First they scout a system, then they arrive in overwhelming force. Resistance results in complete consumption of all organic life. Submission results in forced integration into the collective consciousness. Elena shuddered at the clinical way the being described genocide, but pressed on with her questions. What about their technology, she asked. Surely there must be some flaw. We can exploit the archive unit tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. Vex technology adapts in real time to any threat, he explained. Their ships repair themselves, their weapons adjust to penetrate any defense, and their hive mind calculates optimal responses faster than individual thought. They are the logical conclusion of technological evolution. High Counselor Zeth floated forward, his form shimmering with sadness. Young human, he said gently, we understand your desire to fight, but you must face reality. The Council can offer refugee status to human survivors. We will relocate your species to protected worlds where you can rebuild in safety. Elena felt anger rise in her chest as she realized what they were suggesting. You want us to abandon Earth, she said, her voice rising despite the formal setting. To run away and hide while our homeworld is consumed. That is not who we are, Commander. Thek leaned forward, his reptilian eyes studying Elena with new interest. What do you mean, human? He asked. What is the nature of your species that makes you believe you can succeed where we have failed? Elena thought. of everything she knew about human history, the countless wars and struggles that had shaped their development. She remembered stories of impossible victories and last stands that had become legends. Most importantly, she remembered the one thing that made humans different from every other species she had encountered. "We are chaos," Elena said simply. While other species developed logic and order, humans embraced contradiction and unpredictability. We make decisions that defy reason, fight battles we cannot win, and refuse to accept defeat even when it is inevitable. Perhaps that is exactly what the galaxy needs. The chamber erupted in confused discussions as species tried to understand what Elena meant. The concept of deliberately choosing chaos over order was foreign to most galactic civilizations. They had spent millennia perfecting their societies, eliminating inefficiency, and creating logical systems. But the archive unit leaned forward with something that might have been interest. "Interesting," he said slowly. "Vex calculations assume logical behavior, patterns. Chaos variables could theoretically create computational overflow. However, the risk of self-destruction would be extremely high." Elena smiled grimly as she realized that humanity's greatest weakness might actually be their ultimate strength. "Thank you," she said to the council. "Humanity will face this threat alone if necessary. We choose to fight, rather than run." As the session ended and Elena prepared to leave, she noticed that several species were watching her with expressions she could not read. Some seemed afraid, while others appeared curious about these strange humans who chose chaos over safety. She had no way of knowing that her words had already begun to spread through the galactic communication networks. The news traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum entanglement systems that connected every major civilization. Across the galaxy, species began to discuss these humans who claimed to embrace chaos as a weapon against the unstoppable Vex collective. Most dismissed it as the desperate boasting of a doomed species, but a few began to wonder if perhaps the galaxy had been thinking about the Vex problem in entirely the wrong way. Admiral Kate Williams stood on the command deck of the UES Defiance, watching the enemy fleet emerge from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. She had spent 30 years in the human space navy fighting pirates and rebels, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The Vex Armada stretched across space like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars with over 10,000 ships of various sizes. The human defense fleet consisted of 300 vessels hastily assembled, from military units, patrol ships, and armed civilian craft. Every human world had contributed what they could, but it was still pathetically small compared to the force bearing down on them. Kate felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing on her shoulders as she watched the enemy advance. Dr. Alex Chen studied the tactical displays from his position at the science station, his face pale with concentration. He had spent weeks analyzing every piece of data they had collected about Vex technology and warfare tactics. The enemy ships moved with perfect coordination, each vessel positioned to maximize the effectiveness of the whole fleet. Their formation is mathematically perfect, Alex reported to the bridge crew. Every ship is positioned to provide optimal fire support and defensive coverage. There are no weak points, no gaps we can exploit. It is like fighting a single giant organism rather than individual vessels. Kate nodded grimly as she watched the Vex fleet pass Jupiter without slowing. Long-range scans showed that each enemy ship was larger and more heavily armed than anything in the human fleet. Their weapons could adapt to human technology in real time, and their armor seemed to absorb energy rather than reflect it. Communications. Officer Jenny Walsh looked up from her station with a worried expression. "Admiral," she reported, "we are receiving a transmission from the Vex fleet. They are demanding our immediate surrender. Put it through." Kate ordered, straightening her uniform and preparing to face humanity's enemy. The main screen flickered and filled with the image of what could only be described as a nightmare made real. The Vex spoke through a creature that had once been organic, but was now a twisted fusion of flesh and machine. "Your resistance has been noted and calculated," the thing said in a voice like grinding metal. Probability of human victory is 0.001%. Submit to integration into the collective consciousness and avoid unnecessary suffering. Refusal will result in total consumption of your species. Kate stepped forward and spoke with authority that came from years of command. This is Admiral Kate Williams of the United Earth Defense Fleet. Humanity rejects your offer. We will defend our world and our freedom with everything we have. The Vex creature tilted its head in a motion that was almost curious. Your species displays irrational behavior patterns it observed. Logic dictates immediate surrender when facing overwhelming force. This defiance serves no purpose and will only delay the inevitable outcome. Kate smiled coldly and gave the response that would echo through history. You clearly do not understand humans. We specialize in impossible victories, and we have never learned when to quit. Come and take our world if you can. The transmission ended and the Vex fleet began to accelerate toward Mars orbit where the human defense line waited. Kate turned to her communications officer and gave the order that would unite humanity in its darkest hour, send a message to every human ship station and colony she commanded. Tell them that the battle for our species begins now. We may be outnumbered, but we are not outmatched. Humanity has faced extinction before and survived. Today we show the galaxy what humans are truly capable of. The response came back within minutes, as every human vessel in the solar system acknowledged the message. From the massive battleships to tiny courier craft, the reply was the same. Human voices, speaking in dozens of languages, but with one unified message that rang across space. Come and take it. Captain Jake Morrison led a wing of attack fighters toward the advancing Vex fleet, remembering the dying world they had failed to save. This time would be different because this time they were fighting for their own home. His pilot, Danny Brooks, flew beside him along with 50 other volunteers who knew they probably would not survive the next few hours. The first engagement occurred near Mars orbit as human ships opened fire at maximum range. Energy beams and missile volleys lit up space in a display that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Vex responded with coordinated precision that was almost artistic in its efficiency. Kate watched from the Defiance as the first wave of human ships met the enemy advance. Several human vessels were destroyed in the opening seconds as Vex weapons proved devastatingly effective. But something unexpected happened that made Alex Chen look up from his instruments with surprise. "Admiral," he called out, "the Vex fleet formation is shifting. They are responding to our attack pattern, but their response time is longer than it should be. Something is interfering with their coordination." Kate studied the tactical display and noticed that human ships were not following standard attack doctrines. Instead of logical formation fighting, they were improvising and adapting on the fly. Captain Morrison's fighter wing had just performed a maneuver that violated every rule of space combat and somehow survived because the Vex had not anticipated such reckless behavior. The battle intensified as more human ships joined the fray. Marine Sergeant Danny Brooks led boarding parties against Vex vessels that had been damaged by concentrated fire. His troops used weapons and tactics that were primitive by galactic standards, but they were achieving something that had never been done before. They were actually hurting the Vex. Dr. Chen made a discovery that would change everything as he studied the real-time battle data. "Admiral," he announced, excitement breaking through his scientific calm. "The Vex hive mind calculates responses based on logical probability matrices. But human behavior is introducing variables they cannot process efficiently." Kate felt hope stirring in her chest as she realized what Alex was suggesting. "Our unpredictability is confusing them," she said. "Their perfect coordination depends on being able to predict enemy actions." "Exactly," Alex confirmed. "Every time we do something that defies tactical logic, their response time increases. The hive mind has to recalculate possibilities, and that creates lag in their system. We are literally thinking faster than they can process." On the surface of Mars, human colonists watched the battle raging overhead and made a decision that would become legend. Led by engineer Sam Parker, they began broadcasting every piece of human culture they could find directly into space. Music, poetry, art jokes, and stories filled the communication channels, creating a chaotic symphony of human creativity. The effect on the Vex fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships began to fall out of formation as their hive mind struggled to process the illogical beauty of human expression. The concept of creating something for no practical purpose was so alien to them that it caused processing errors throughout their network. Kate realized that humanity had found the one weapon that could hurt the Vex, something they had never encountered in their expansion across the galaxy. Pure, unfiltered human chaos was proving to be more effective than any conventional weapon. Signal all ships, she ordered. Abandon standard tactics immediately. I want every captain to improvise their own strategy. Do whatever seems like the worst possible idea and then do it anyway. Make no sense and follow no rules. The human fleet transformed from an organized military force into something that resembled controlled chaos. Ships attacked from impossible angles, performed maneuvers that should have been suicide, and used weapons in ways they were never designed for. It was everything the galactic military experts would have called insane, and it was working. The Vex fleet began to show signs of confusion as their perfect formation started to break apart. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the collective was encountering something they could not adapt to or overcome through logical analysis. Humanity had become the variable that broke their equation. The battle raged through the inner solar system as human ships continued their chaotic assault against the Vex fleet. Marine Sergeant Danny Brooks crouched behind makeshift cover aboard the captured Vex cruiser, watching his men fight beings that should have been impossible to defeat. The enemy moved with mechanical precision, but something was wrong with their coordination. Brooks had noticed it during the first boarding action when his squad managed to overwhelm a Vex position through pure aggressive chaos. The aliens seemed confused by human tactics that made no logical sense. Instead of calculated movements and strategic positioning, humans just charged forward, screaming and firing everything they had. We took prisoners during the last assault, Brooks reported to his lieutenant over the combat radio. But something weird is happening to them. The captured Vex are acting strange, like they are fighting something inside their own heads. Lieutenant Carol Hayes studied the alien prisoners through the containment field that held them in the ship's cargo bay. The Vex had always been described as emotionless machines driven by collective logic, but these captives were displaying something that looked almost like individual thought. Dr. Lisa Grant arrived on the scene with her portable laboratory equipment, eager to study living Vex specimens. She had been analyzing their technology and biology since the battle began, trying to find any weakness that could be exploited. What she discovered would change the course of the war. The Vex hive mind operates through quantum entanglement, she explained to the assembled Marines. Each individual is connected to the collective consciousness, but the connection is not permanent. When humans are assimilated, there is a brief period where individual personality remains active before integration is complete. Brooks leaned forward with interest as he began to understand what she was suggesting. You mean they keep some of who? They were even after being taken, he asked. That is why the prisoners are acting weird, because part of them is still fighting. Exactly, Lisa confirmed. And here is the important part. During that transition period, assimilated humans retain access to the Vex network. If we could find a way to use that connection, we might be able to introduce chaos directly into their system. The idea was insane and would require volunteers to allow themselves to be partially assimilated by an enemy that consumed entire species. But Brooks had seen enough impossible things in the last few hours to know that insane plans sometimes worked better than logical ones. I will do it, he said, simply causing everyone in the room to stare at him. Someone has to test this theory, and Marines are supposed to take the dangerous jobs. Besides, I am too stubborn to let some alien computer tell me what to think. Dr. Grant spent the next hour preparing Brooks for the most dangerous mission in human history. She would allow a captured Vex drone to begin the assimilation process while monitoring his brain patterns and standing ready to sever the connection if necessary. The chances of survival were minimal, but the potential payoff was enormous. Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison continued leading fighter attacks against the main Vex fleet using tactics that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. His squadron flew in patterns that resembled drunken spirals more than military formations, but they were achieving kill ratios that defied explanation. "The enemy keeps trying to predict our movements," Morrison reported to Admiral Williams, "but every time we do something completely random, they have to recalculate their response. It is like fighting someone who can see the future, but we keep changing the timeline." Admiral Williams watched the tactical display as human forces slowly pushed the Vex fleet back toward Jupiter. The enemy still outnumbered them 10-1, but their perfect coordination was breaking down under the assault of human unpredictability. Ships were colliding with each other as conflicting orders created confusion in their network. Dr. Alex Chen made another breakthrough as he studied the real-time data from the battle. "Admiral," he called out, "I am detecting massive computational overload in the Vex command structure. Their hive mind is trying to process too many chaotic variables at once. The system is literally overheating from trying to understand human behavior on the captured Vex cruiser Brooks prepared for his desperate mission." The alien drone stood motionless in the containment field, its mechanical eyes focused on nothing, while waiting for orders from the collective. Dr. Grant activated the monitoring equipment and gave Brooks a device that would sever the connection. "If he lost control," remember, she warned, "the moment you feel your personality slipping, use the emergency disconnect. We need you to plant chaos in their network, not become another Vex drone." Brooks nodded and stepped into the containment field. The Vex drone immediately focused on him and extended technological appendages that would begin the assimilation process. He felt cold metal touch his skin and fought every instinct to pull away as alien technology invaded his nervous system. For a moment, pain filled his entire world as the Vex attempted to suppress his individual consciousness and integrate him into the collective. But Brooks had spent years as a Marine, learning to push through impossible situations. He held on to his sense of self while allowing the connection to form. Suddenly, he was inside the Vex network, experiencing the sensation of being connected to millions of minds working in perfect harmony. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like standing in the center of a vast machine that stretched across the galaxy. But Brooks had not come here to admire their efficiency. He began thinking about everything that made humans chaotic. He remembered practical jokes from basic training, the time his unit got drunk and painted their commanding officer's office pink, and the complete insanity of military bureaucracy. He focused on human emotions like love, anger, hope, and the stubborn refusal to accept logical defeat. The effect was immediate and devastating. The perfect order of the Vex network began to fracture as contradictory information flooded through the system. Millions of drones suddenly experienced confusion, doubt, and the terrifying concept of individual thought. The hive mind tried to purge the chaotic data, but it spread faster than their error correction protocols could handle. Back on the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Williams watched in amazement as the Vex fleet began to fall apart. Ships stopped responding to commands, formations collapsed, and some vessels actually opened fire on their own forces. As confused signals spread through their network, Brooks activated the emergency disconnect and stumbled out of the containment field, gasping for air. The brief connection had left him with memories of the vast Vex collective and an understanding of their true weakness. They were too perfect, too logical to handle the beautiful chaos that defined humanity. It worked, he reported weakly to Dr. Grant. "I planted enough contradictions in their system to cause cascade failures throughout the network. They cannot process human irrationality because they have never encountered anything like it before." The tide of battle turned as the Vex fleet struggled with system failures and coordination breakdowns. Human ships pressed their advantage using increasingly creative tactics that pushed the boundaries of physics and sanity. Captain Morrison led a charge directly through the center of an enemy formation, while his pilots sang old rock songs over the radio. "So, Vex had conquered countless worlds by overwhelming them with superior technology and perfect tactical coordination, but they had never faced an enemy that treated warfare like a form of creative expression. Humanity was rewriting the rules of galactic conflict one chaotic moment at a time. As the battle continued, Dr. Grant made a discovery that would echo through history. The Vex network was not just damaged, it was learning to fear. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the collective was experiencing an emotion they had no programming to handle. They were afraid of these humans who could not be predicted, controlled, or understood. Admiral Kate Williams stood before the tactical display, watching something that military analysts would later call impossible. The Vex fleet that had seemed unstoppable just hours before was now retreating in disorder as their perfect formation collapsed under the weight of human chaos. But victory was not yet assured because the enemy command nexus remained intact. At the center of their formation, Dr. Alex Chen worked frantically at his station, analyzing the cascade failures spreading through the Vex network. The quantum entanglement system that connected their hive mind was overloading as contradictory data from Sergeant Brooks' infiltration continued to propagate through their collective consciousness. Admiral, he reported with excitement. The chaos virus is spreading faster than their error correction protocols can handle. Individual Vex drones are beginning to experience isolated consciousness for the first time in their existence. They are literally learning to think as individuals, and it is terrifying. Kate smiled grimly as she realized that humanity had discovered the ultimate weapon against a species that valued perfection above all else. They were teaching the Vex to be human, and the experience was driving them insane. Signal all ships, she ordered. Implement Protocol Omega immediately. I want maximum chaos across all frequencies. Every captain is authorized to ignore orders and follow their own instincts. Make this battle so unpredictable that even we do not know what we are doing. The human fleet transformed into something that resembled controlled anarchy rather than military organization. Ships attacked from impossible angles using tactics that violated every principle of space warfare. Captain Jake Morrison led a squadron in a spiraling dive directly through the enemy formation while broadcasting human music at maximum volume on. Earth engineer Sam Parker coordinated a global effort to flood space with human cultural transmissions. Every radio telescope and communication array on the planet began broadcasting the chaotic beauty of human creativity into the void. Poetry, music, art, comedy, and philosophy filled the electromagnetic spectrum, creating a symphony of organized madness. Effect on the remaining Vex ships was devastating. Their hive mind had evolved to process logical data and coordinate millions of units with mathematical precision. But human culture was the antithesis of logic, filled with contradictions, emotions, and ideas that served no practical purpose, yet somehow held profound meaning. Commander Ryan Burke led a boarding party onto a damaged Vex cruiser and discovered something that would become legend. The alien crew was huddled in corners experiencing what could only be described as existential crisis for beings that had never known. Individual thought, the sudden awareness of self, was overwhelming. They keep asking who they are, Burke reported over the radio as his Marines secured the vessel. The Vex drones are looking at their hands like they have never seen them before. Some of them are actually crying if that is possible for machines. Dr. Lisa Grant studied the captured Vex technology and made a discovery that explained their vulnerability. Their entire civilization was based on the elimination of uncertainty and the pursuit of perfect efficiency. Every variable was calculated, every outcome predicted, and every action optimized for maximum effectiveness. But humans were walking, talking embodiments of uncertainty. They made decisions based on emotion, created art for no logical reason, and chose to fight battles they could not win simply because it felt right. To the Vex, this behavior was not just alien, it was impossible. The command nexus at the center of the Vex formation began to pulse with erratic energy patterns, as the hive mind struggled to maintain control over units that were developing individual personalities. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the collective was experiencing doubt. Captain Morrison received new orders from Admiral Williams that would have been considered mutiny under normal circumstances. He was to lead a direct assault on the command nexus using the most irrational tactics possible. The goal was not just to destroy the enemy, but to introduce so much chaos that their entire fleet would collapse. Morrison gathered his remaining pilots and explained the mission with a grin that would have terrified any rational enemy. "We are going to fly straight at the biggest, most heavily defended target in the galaxy and attack it with everything we have. When they ask why we did something so stupid, we will tell them it seemed like a good idea at the time." The assault began, as human fighters dove toward the command nexus in formations that resembled abstract art more than military strategy. They flew in spirals, loops, and figure eights, while firing weapons at random intervals and playing music that ranged from classical symphonies to death metal. The Vex defensive systems tried to calculate interception courses, but human pilots kept changing direction for no apparent reason. Missile volleys missed their targets because the humans were not following any predictable flight path. Energy weapons fired at empty space because the targeting computers could not process the chaotic movement patterns inside the command nexus. The collective consciousness began to fragment as individual nodes started asking questions that had no logical answers. Why did humans create music that served no survival function, and why did they fight for concepts like freedom and dignity that could not be quantified? The questions spread through the network like a virus infecting every connected mind with doubt and confusion. Vex drones across the fleet began to malfunction as their programming struggled to process concepts that their creators had never imagined possible. Sergeant Brooks recovered from his earlier infiltration and volunteered for an even more dangerous mission. He would allow himself to be fully assimilated while maintaining conscious control through sheer force of will. The goal was to plant chaos directly in the command nexus itself. Dr. Grant prepared him for the mission while explaining that the chances of survival were virtually zero. Brooks simply shrugged and reminded her that Marines were trained to do impossible things on a regular basis. Besides, he added with dark humor, someone had to show these aliens what human stubbornness really looked. Like the final assault reached its climax as Morrison's fighters penetrated the defensive perimeter around the command nexus. They attacked with weapons that should not have been effective and used tactics that defied every principle of military science. Most importantly, they did it all while laughing and joking over the radio like they were enjoying themselves. The Vex Collective experienced something it had never felt before: terror. Not the logical fear of destruction, but the deep existential horror of encountering something that could not be understood or controlled. These humans were chaos incarnate, and they seemed to revel in their own unpredictability. As Brooks prepared for his final mission, he looked around at the crew of humans who had become his family. They were scared, tired, and facing an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. But they were also laughing, making jokes, and planning their next impossible victory. That was when he understood the true nature of humanity's weapon against the Vex. It was not just chaos or unpredictability. It was hope. The irrational belief that tomorrow could be better than today, and that impossible dreams were worth fighting for, even when logic said they could not win. The command nexus began to overload as the collective consciousness fragmented under the assault of human chaos. Individual Vex units across the fleet started experiencing emotions they had no framework to understand: fear, doubt, curiosity, and worst of all, the terrifying freedom of individual choice. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the Vex Collective was learning what it meant to be afraid. The command nexus erupted in cascading failures as Sergeant Brooks completed his infiltration mission. He had successfully planted chaos directly into the heart of the Vex collective consciousness, and the results were beyond anything humanity had dared to hope for. The massive structure that coordinated millions of ships across the galaxy began to tear itself apart from within. Admiral Kate Williams watched from the bridge of the Defiance as something unprecedented occurred throughout. The Vex fleet, Ships that had moved in perfect formation for millennia suddenly began firing on each other as confused signals spread through their network. The hive mind was experiencing its first case of multiple personality disorder. Dr. Alex Chen studied the data streaming from the battle and shook his head in amazement. "Admiral," he reported, "the collective consciousness is fragmenting into individual units. Each Vex drone is developing its own personality, and they are all terrified of being alone. They have never experienced individual thought before, and it is driving them insane." Captain Jake Morrison led the final assault on the command nexus as it pulsed with erratic energy that threatened to tear space itself apart. His fighters weaved through defensive fire that had become completely random as the Vex targeting systems struggled to process the chaos spreading through their network. The enemy was learning to feel fear, doubt, and worst of all, hope, individual. Vex drones across the fleet began to question orders for the first time in their existence. Some tried to communicate with human ships, asking questions that had no logical answers, like why humans fought for things they could not touch or measure. On the surface of Mars, engineer Sam Parker coordinated the final phase of the cultural bombardment. Every human colony, city, and settlement contributed to the effort, filling space with the chaotic beauty of human expression. The electromagnetic spectrum blazed with poetry, music, art, and the random thoughts of billions of individual minds. The effect on the Vex collective was devastating, because they had never encountered a species that celebrated individuality rather than trying to eliminate it. Human culture was built on the idea that differences made society stronger, while Vex civilization demanded absolute conformity to the collective will. Dr. Lisa Grant made the final breakthrough as she studied the captured Vex technology. She discovered that their entire species had evolved from a single consciousness that had gradually absorbed other civilizations to become stronger. But the process had also made them vulnerable to anything that promoted individual thought over collective action. "They are not evil," she announced to the bridge crew. "They are just lonely. The collective consciousness has been searching for connection, but the only way they know how to bond with others is through assimilation. They have never learned to coexist with different forms of life." The realization changed everything because it meant the Vex could potentially be reasoned with if they could learn to accept individuality. But first, humanity had to survive the current battle and prove that chaos could be stronger than perfect order. The command nexus began to collapse as the collective consciousness split into millions of individual fragments. For the first time, in their expansion across the galaxy, each Vex drone had to make its own decisions without guidance from the hive mind. Most of them simply shut down from the overwhelming responsibility. Commander Ryan Burke led boarding parties onto Vex ships that had stopped functioning as their crews huddled together trying to understand what was happening to them. The aliens, that had once seemed like unstoppable machines, now appeared lost and confused, like children who had been separated from their parents. Some of the individual Vex drones approached the human Marines with gestures that seemed almost pleading. They tried to communicate through broken fragments of various languages, asking questions about identity, purpose, and the terrifying freedom of choice. Burke found himself in the surreal position of comforting alien beings who had just learned they were individuals. He explained concepts like friendship, family, and personal dreams to creatures who had never needed names because they had all been part of the same consciousness. The battle reached its climax as the command nexus finally overloaded and exploded in a burst of energy that could be seen from Earth. The massive structure that had coordinated Vex expansion for thousands of years was gone, taking with it the collective consciousness that had defined their civilization across. The solar system Vex ships drifted powerless as their crews struggled to understand what had happened to them. Some vessels attempted to flee, while others simply waited for instructions that would never come. The great collective had shattered into millions of individual minds, each one trying to figure out who they were and what they wanted. Admiral Williams received reports from across the fleet confirming that the Vex threat had ended not through destruction, but through transformation. The enemy had not been defeated so much as they had been taught to be human. Individual consciousness had spread through their ranks like a virus, turning a hive mind into a collection of unique personalities. The galaxy watched in amazement as news of the battle spread through quantum communication networks. Species that had hidden from the Vex for centuries began to emerge from their refuges, while others who had considered fleeing their homeworlds decided to stay and fight. But the most important change was in how other civilizations viewed humanity. The species that had been dismissed as primitive chaos makers had accomplished something that advanced civilizations had thought impossible. They had found a way to defeat the Vex without destroying them. Captain Morrison returned to the horizon with a cargo hold full of individual Vex who had asked to learn more about human culture. They were fascinated by concepts like friendship art and the idea that being different could be valuable rather than a flaw to be corrected. Dr. Grant began working with former Vex drones to help them understand their new individuality. She discovered that many of them possessed incredible creativity once they were freed from the collective consciousness. They began creating art, music, and poetry that reflected their unique perspectives on existence. The former collective consciousness that had terrorized the galaxy was gone, but something better had taken its place. Millions of individual beings were learning to think for themselves, exploring concepts like love, friendship, and hope for the first time in their existence. Elena Rodriguez addressed the Galactic Council once again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Representatives who had once looked upon humanity with pity now regarded them with a mixture of awe and terror. The species that embraced chaos had proven more dangerous than any military force the human representative has requested to address, the Assembly High Counselor Zeth announced. The session will hear her words. Alina stood before the same chamber where she had once begged for help, but now she spoke with the authority of a species that had changed the galaxy forever. The Vex threat has ended, she announced. Not through conquest, but through transformation. We have taught them to be individuals, and they are learning to choose cooperation over assimilation. Commander Thek of the Corvan Empire leaned forward, his reptilian features showing something that might have been respect mixed with fear. How did your species accomplish what we could not? He asked. What weapon did you use that our advanced technology could not provide? Elena smiled as she gave the answer that would become legend throughout the galaxy. We used humanity itself, she said simply. Our chaos, our creativity, our stubborn refusal to accept defeat. We taught the Vex that being different is not a weakness to be corrected, but a strength to be celebrated. The chamber fell silent as species that had spent millennia perfecting their civilizations realized they had been thinking about strength in completely the wrong way. Humanity had won not by becoming more like their enemies, but by remaining completely themselves. As the session ended, Elena noticed that several species were looking at humanity with an expression she recognized. It was the same look the Vex had worn in their final moments. Fear of the unknown and unpredictable. Across the galaxy, a new message began to spread through the communication networks. It was not a threat or a demand, but simply a statement of fact that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Beware the humans. They are chaos incarnate. They cannot be predicted, controlled, or understood. They are the nightmare that logic cannot solve. Humanity had become the thing that other species feared in the dark. Not because they were cruel or evil, but because they were completely and utterly unpredictable. In a galaxy that valued order and logic above all else, humans had proven that sometimes chaos was the most powerful force of all. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the horizon, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed quite so dark. Somewhere out there, former Vex drones were learning to laugh and dream, while other species reconsidered everything they thought they knew about strength and survival. Humanity had saved the galaxy not by conquering it, but by teaching it to embrace the beautiful chaos of individual thought. They had become the guardians of everything that was unique and different in a universe that often tried to make everything the same. And in the depths of space where ancient civilizations watched and worried a new legend was being born.